I see that you're considering buying a Miata. Let me say, good choice, you won't be disappointed. But what should you know before you go look at them and before you actually buy one for yourself? In this video, I'm going to be going over 10 valuable tips that'll help you pick out the right Miata for you. So let's get into it. Number one on the list is something that's very important when picking out a car for yourself. Don't overpay for someone else's mods. Now, people love to modify these Miatas because, well, they have so much aftermarket support that there's tons of aftermarket parts out there to personalize a car and really make it your own and make it do what you want it to do. Whether that's turbo kits, slamming it and making it look awesome, or just doing whatever you want to do to it, people modify these cars like crazy. And when you're buying one for yourself, you want to make sure that the mods that are done to it suit your needs. Don't overpay for someone else's taste. For example, if you want to autocross a car, don't pay extra for a car that has super wide wheels with stretched tires and is slammed to the ground. Look for mods that'll actually help you out, like high performance tires and wheels. Look for good roll bars. Don't be fooled by style bars. Style bars are basically a safety hazard in these cars because they'll fold over like mouse traps. But good roll bars add value. Race seats, if you're interested in something like that, add value. But a lot of additional stuff like sticker bombing, putting random wheels on the car that you might not like, or painting random panels different colors isn't going to add value to you. So make sure that you're buying a car that's been modified in a way that you want, or just basically don't pay extra for something you don't want. Also, when you're looking at a car, keep in mind mods that you might be able to take off and sell. If there is some stuff that you think is junk, but it's worth $300, like a set of wheels that are wide and you don't think look good, but other people might, you could consider that when you're picking up a car and help you get a good deal on the car. Along those same lines, if a car is heavily modified but comes with the stock parts and you're willing to put in the time to revert a car to stock, you could often sell aftermarket parts, make a decent amount of money back on there, and then put the stock parts back on the car and end up with a car that you actually want. Next up, number two on the list, we have to talk about something that could absolutely ruin one of these cars if it happened. Now, these soft tops on these cars are fairly fragile, especially because they get very old, and these cars were made in the late 90s to early 2000s, and they often rip and get very leaky. Now, if you see this in an ad, oh, this car is great, but the soft top's just ripped, you might want to think twice. Now, the reason for that is when a soft top rips, it's not only the cost of the soft top that you're going to have to pay for, because the whole interior of the car is likely to be very musty and moldy and full of junk. Now, that's not a fun thing to have to clean out, and also it could be more than just must and mold, because underneath all the carpet you could have a rusting car from the inside out, and that's something you really don't want. Now, to avoid this, obviously you have to go look at the car and see if it is just the soft top or if the inside is getting pretty bad, and you could pull back the carpet a little bit and see if it's starting to rust from the inside out, because if it is, you don't want it and you really don't want to pay a lot for it. My third tip when looking at a Miata to buy is check for rust. Now, there's a couple reasons why you want to check for rust. One, it looks really bad if the car is starting to rust. Two, if you're working on the car and all the bolts are rusty, it's really hard to take stuff apart, and also you're more likely to break stuff and have to pay for aftermarket bolts and replacement bolts down the road. And also, it could compromise the structural integrity of the car depending on how bad the rust is. Now, places that you want to check for rust are the front fender and rockers. So right in this area here, if there's stuff built up behind the front fender, that's a definite spot where these things rust, once again, sort of from the inside out. If there's holes anywhere in the rocker, that's bad. You're going to want to get that fixed, because once it gets too far in there, it starts to ruin the structural integrity of the car, because you're actually messing with support panels rather than just the outside skin. So if you see rust there, you're going to want to consider that you're probably going to want to fix that down the road, and that's going to either take a decent amount of time or a decent amount of money. Now, also, you want to check under the car and look at your suspension components and just the underneath of the car in general. If there's rust on the suspension components and all the bolts that you're going to be taking apart while you work on this car and do maintenance and modify it, it's going to add a lot of time and money, because like I said, you're going to break bolts and spend time getting rusty bolts out that if the car weren't rusty would be a lot easier. Next up, Don't pay for the one or for someone else's baby. Now, what I mean by this is if someone had one of these cars in their family for a long time, they might try to charge more for it because it's of sentimental value to them. Now, while this is great, and of course you will get attached to your car, it doesn't mean that the car is worth more because they've had it in their family for a long time. Now, I was trying to buy a Miata when I was in the market for one, and there was one that was an absolute rusty pile of junk that someone wanted $3,000 for because it was their baby. Do not pay more because it's their baby. Pay for a car because it's a good car underneath, and if they have had it for a long time, ask them for maintenance records and what they've done to the car to make sure it's still in good shape, which I'm going to get to in a second. If you're interested in a special color combo, like if you're very specific and want like a 1994 Montego Blue M Edition car, and those are a rare color that only comes up sometimes, by all means, pay a little bit more for it. But just because someone else thinks it's a super special car doesn't mean it is. These cars come up a lot, and you're always going to be able to find one that will suit your needs. Continuing off of number 4 here, number 5 is going to be ask for a maintenance history on the car. Now, these cars are old and are likely to have very high miles, and you want to make sure that they were properly kept up with during their years of use. A big thing to ask for that may seem like common sense is ask how often the car has got oil changes and ask when the last oil change has been. Now, these cars are often neglected because young kids will buy them and have them as their project car that they really beat on, or old people will have them and they'll forget to do maintenance. You want to make sure that they're kept up on, and like I said, oil changes are normally a pretty good thing to give you an idea of how well it was cared for. While you're talking to the owner of a car, try to get the feel of how they treated the car. You know, was it beat on? Was it owned by an old lady that only drove it on Sundays to get groceries? And just get a general feel of how the car has been treated its whole life, and if that sounds like something that you want in your life. Now, my car, I bought with very high mileage. I bought it at about 205,000 miles. It was dented all over, and it was $1,000. But it was owned by an old lady and sold to an auction, and it's been actually pretty great ever since. And in terms of mechanical problems, I really haven't had any. So, like I said, get a feel for what's wrong with it, how it's been treated, and you'll be in good shape. In terms of actual maintenance items to look out for, you do want to check oil changes. You want to ask about the timing belt and water pump because that's a common problem on these cars, and it's really just a common maintenance item. You want to look over the car and look at your radiator. If it's starting to turn green, it's going bad and likely will explode on you. You want to check all the plastic and rubber lines in the car. Once again, see if they're deteriorating, getting hard and brittle, and make sure that the car looks dependable and that it's been kept up on and will be something that will get you where you want to go. Another thing to ask that's really just common sense with all cars is ask if the car had been in an accident, because if it had, it's going to have a lower value. It's going to be potentially harder to work on if stuff is bent up and twisted. And if it's in an accident, you don't want to pay a premium for a car that's been crashed, even if it looks nice. And finally, just look over the car for coolant leaks and oil leaks, because once again, that'll tell you if the car has been nicely kept up on or if it's just sort of been abandoned and beat on and just used up, really. Next up on the list is something that might be a little controversial. And I would say that mileage really doesn't matter all that much for these cars. Now, they were made between 1990 and 2005 for the NA and the NB versions, which is what this video is tailored to. And in that time, they've had a lot of time to be used and driven and have miles racked up on them. Now, that's not to say that a high mileage car won't be in worse shape than a lower mileage car, but it's important that these cars were driven and kept up with rather than put away and parked and had a chance for everything to deteriorate. Now, these engines really aren't super high maintenance. The cars themselves aren't very high maintenance. So if the little bit of maintenance that they require is kept up on, these engines are generally very reliable and you'll be able to get yourself a good car even if it has higher miles. Now, if you're interested in getting the perfect collector's car and you want something that's absolutely mint and low mileage because it's worth more, well, low mileage is still worth more. So don't pay a ton for a car with super high mileage, but keep in mind that just because a car has been driven doesn't mean you're going to get a bad deal on it and that it's going to be a pile of junk. Next on the list, once again, is something that isn't specific to Miatas, but it's very important when you're looking at a car. And that is check your wear items. Now, you want to check your tires, brakes, and brake pads to make sure that there's still a decent amount of life left in them. Now, it's important to check tires, especially on Miatas, because once again, these cars are old and rubber tends to dry rot and go bad as it ages. Check the sidewalls of the tire for any cracks that are out of the ordinary, and check the tread life that's left on the tire by one, putting your finger in the tread and seeing how it feels, but also looking at the tread marks which run this way on the tire, and if your tread is down to those wear marks, it's going to be time to replace your tires, and you're going to have additional costs on top of the price of the car. Now, the same goes for the brakes. Look at the rotors and make sure they're not gouged or in really bad shape, and look at the pads and see if there's life left on them. If there is, you're in good shape. If there's not, it's really not the end of the world, but it's just going to be an additional cost that you're going to have to pay for. An additional thing to check, which is another wear item that commonly goes bad on these cars, is the shocks. Now, to test the shocks, you could press up and down on the car and see if the car wants to keep bouncing or if it slows down quickly and returns to a non-moving position. If it doesn't move, then you know the shocks are in good shape. If it bounces, you're going to also have to expect to replace the shocks. Now, shocks aren't very expensive for these cars. There's a lot of aftermarket parts available as well. So once again, it's not a big problem if the shocks are bad, but it's another added cost that you might want to consider that you might have to pay for if they are bad. Next on the list, coming in at number 8, is you want to try to identify which rear end differential the Miata has that you're looking at. Now, if you're buying this just as a weekend cruiser and a fun daily driver that you're not going to be really pushing to the limits, it probably doesn't matter so much what diff you have in your car. But if you want to do some more high performance driving, there's a couple differentials that you want, and there's one that you want to look out for. If you have a viscous limited slip differential, which was available with the 1.6 liter engine in the earlier cars, this differential could not really handle that much extra power. So if you have this, be prepared to have to upgrade it if you're planning on turbocharging or supercharging your car, because even though some people have ran higher horsepower on these diffs, they're not great for it. Now, if you're looking at a 1.8, you want the Torsen differential. This is the limited slip differential that came from the car from the factory that could handle a decent amount of power, and also, well, it's a limited slip differential, so you will be able to lock up both tires and slide the thing around a bit and have fun with it. If you have a 1.8 with an open diff, it also will handle a decent amount of power and can be welded if you want to go full drift boy with it. But once again, both of those are decent options, but you want to try to avoid that viscous limited slip if you're going to go with more power. Now, with that said, my car does have the viscous limited slip differential, and it's been fine for what I've done with it with stock power. I also have done a lot of autocrosses and pushed the car pretty hard, and it hasn't really had any problems, although it's not really a great limited slip because, well, it's not that limited and you get a lot of one tire fire with it. Now, there are two ways to determine which diff your car has. One, you could ask the owner. If they're knowledgeable on the car, they'll probably know what diff the car has. And two, you could give Mazda the VIN number from the car, and they'll tell you which diff the car originally came with. Now, obviously, if that's been changed, the owner will know, or you need to get a really good look at it. If you want to figure out if you have a limited slip diff, you could go on a loose surface like dirt or wet pavement and try to slide both of the rear tires in a straight line. And if they both spin, you have a limited slip. If one spins, you have an open diff or a blown viscous limited slip. So keep that in mind when you're buying one of these cars, if that is all important to you. All right, so now we're getting towards the end of the list, and you've looked over your car. You have a good idea of how the car looks and how it's been treated and if it's something that you actually would want. And now it's time to go ahead and test drive it. So number 9 is take the car that you're looking to buy on a test drive. Now, when you're driving around, you want to listen for weird noises. This includes grinds from the transmission, anything weird from the engine, and any loud sounding things that sound like exhaust leaks because, well, those are things that you're going to want to fix down the line. Now, you also want to try to shift the car through all the gears. Make sure that it shifts smooth and that it feels like a good car to you. You want to feel the clutch if you're looking at a manual, and you're looking at a Miata. You should be looking at a manual because it's way more fun. Anyway, when you're feeling the clutch pedal, you don't want any grinds or weird noises coming from that. And in general, just get a feel for the car. Make sure it feels solid and like something that you would want to buy. Other systems to check is see if the AC works. A lot of these cars get AC leaks and then they're not refilled. And if you have an older car, it needs to be updated to a more modern refrigerant. And if that's not done, well, your AC won't work. And once again, that's another expense that you might have to pay for down the line. Also, feel free to give the car a lot of power when you're driving around. Obviously, these cars don't have much power, but if you go full throttle, you want to feel for clutch slip. If the RPMs come up, but it doesn't feel like you accelerate, the clutch is likely slipping, and you want to avoid that car or expect to replace the clutch. And yeah, really, you just need to get a good feel for the car and see if it's something that you're interested in. Once you're done driving the car around, go ahead and pull it into somewhere that you could look at it, whether that be somewhere on the road or at the owner's driveway, and inspect the car for leaks, smell for oil leaks, smell for coolant, and just see if there's anything wrong with the car. All right, guys, congratulations. You've made it this far. You've looked over a Miata, and now it's decision time. You have to decide for number 10 if the car that you looked at is right for you. Now, like I said, you want to decide what you want to use the car for. If you want to slam it, if you want to autocross it, or if you just want a nice, comfortable daily driver, and see if the car that you're looking at fits the bill. Now, obviously, like I said, people do a lot of different things with these cars, and you want one that feels right for you. If you want a super low mileage cream puff of a car and you're looking at a 160,000 mile car that's beat and has rust, it's not a good fit for you, and you need to know that when you're looking at these cars. Like I said, get one that really fits what you want to do with it, and you will be extremely happy because Miatas are awesome cars and they're just really enjoyable to own and to drive. So that's going to wrap up this video. Leave any comments or tips that you have for other people that are looking at buying a Miata down below. Help our fellow Miata community out by doing that. Like this video if you liked it and subscribe for more. I hope you stick around for the next one.